Grace be unto you and peace from God our Father. And this verse is kind of like medicine for our soul. It gives us hope that we can get better. Or we lose a loved one, and these words helped us through the valley of the shadow of death. Or we've done something that made us, or something happened to us that made us feel crushed or beaten or disappointed. And this verse gave us hope to carry on. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him. Yet I'm sure that there are people who, even Christians, who aren't sure they particularly believe that's true. They hear this passage quoted, and they, instead of it being a balm to their soul, it's almost like a cruel joke. What do you mean, all things work together for good? My sickness isn't good. Murder isn't good. Divorce is not good. Suicide is terrible. And there are all these lies and deceit that we hear everywhere. How can all of this work together for good? The verse can be misused, I know, by well-meaning people who sometimes use it as a sort of in a flippant way. When something bad happens, well, you say, well, you know, all things work together for good. And of course, that's not exactly what that passage is saying, but it is kind of what it's been made into becoming. Do all things work together for our good? In our modern world, can we still believe this? Maybe we ought to be honest and say, and even admit that we might have a problem or two with that verse now and then when things happen and we say, what in the possible good could ever come out of that? Well, there's a couple of reasons that we may have a problem with this verse. One of it is that it promises something that we may have trouble believing. Paul says, we know that in all those who love God, all things work together for good. But how can we be sure, really? By the way, the version that we use, the English Standard Version, says those words, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. But most of us aren't sure we do know. We hope that they'll turn out good. We want them to turn out good. We want to believe that they will. But does that make them true? Well, then there's another thing, and that's that the verse seems so definitive. All things work together for good to those who love God. And of course, we might say to that, well, yeah, some things work out for our good, but all things? I suppose that, difficulties can teach us some lessons of life that we can't learn in any other way. We might feel that about it. Or sometimes bad things do turn out to be good, but all things? Perhaps it's true, as one person says, in a theoretical sense, or as a statement of faith. I believe that all things work together for those who love God, for good for those who love God. But can it be true to all of life? Even knowing this is God's Word, it may seem hard to accept and believe. For a while in my ministry, I discovered that I was able to take classes at the Denver Seminary free. And for preachers or church workers, if it's free, you got to kind of follow that along a little bit. And I went and took a short course that involved one of his instructors is Dr. Vernon Grounds, who was past president and chancellor of Denver Seminary. And he's a soft-spoken, conservative gentleman that just, I don't know if there was a bad bone or a mean bone in his body, but he just had such a beautiful way of showing and sharing the love of Christ. And I heard him explain a little bit about this verse. He says, first, To understand this verse, you must begin with God. Now, most of us have maybe heard the old King James Version that says, all things work together for good to those who love God, which is what the King James basically says. But he says that puts God last. All things work together for good to those who love God. He says if you don't put God closer to the front, you're missing the whole point. The English Standard Version that we use says, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. And that's more clear. But this version, this New American Standard Version, we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him. I see a real clear difference there. Maybe you do too. If God is way down at the end of that verse, well, then it may seem that it all depends upon us. You know, if all things work together for good to those who love God, it's different than hearing it, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him. We will never properly understand this verse if we don't see God at the beginning, at the end, and also all the way through in the middle of life. It's God all the way, not us, not faith, not something that we have to maintain an attitude. It's God. But not everyone sees it quite that way. They may believe that life is kind of like a roll of the dice, you know. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Others may believe that after a tragedy, God can sort of show up and magically make things turn out good. But see, that's not the biblical understanding. We need to see and accept that God is at the beginning of what's happening to us in life, and He's at the end, and He's all the way through in what happens between. Every point. God is at work in all of the events of our lives, not luck or fate or chance. It's God, and He knows best. Romans 8:28 is really all about God being with us and holding us by the hand, and He's with us before it happens, He's with us while it's happening, and He's with us when it's all over with as well. And that's His promise. And I don't mean it to be a sort of a happily ever after thing, you know, where you just do this and you'll just be fine. Because tragedy happens along the way, and tragedy is still tragedy. Pain is still pain. But when we see God as being with us, first in the events of life and then all the rest of the way through our life, then we get it right. Not fate, it's not karma, it's not luck, it's God. And He's always actively involved in our life's work. So we can believe Romans 8:28, but only if we see that the event of life begin with God and they stick with Him all the way through. Second thing Dr. Grounds explained about this verse is he says you need to have a long-term perspective of the whole thing. We need to see more than just today and what's happening today. Because see, so much of what we see today seems so unexplainable. Why does a tornado destroy one house and leave another one totally untouched? Literally right next to it. Why does one child excel and do wonderfully well, and another child of the same parents who treated him the same way struggle and struggle? Why does that selfish old horrible man live to be 90 or 95 when that young bride dies within the first 5 years of their marriage? Why do, our questions, I guess, can seem endless. And by themselves, they may make no sense whatsoever. When tragedy comes, we have to remember we can't see the purpose, because we need to have patience to understand that there's a bigger picture out there, and it's all going to make sense. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I wake up and get the coffee and look at the newspaper or listen to the news, I wonder, what world are we living in right now anyway? What do you mean kids can't go to school this fall? Or why must masks have to be used? And some people are saying, not just this year, but next year and the year after too. I had one who said, we should stop shaking hands. Wait a minute. What do you mean? Other things like changing genders or two guys getting married or whatever. What do you mean no police? Is this all a bad dream? Because if it is, I hope somebody snaps their fingers and we wake up. Sometimes nothing seems to make sense. Well, baseball started a couple days ago, and I'm kind of happy about that, even though if the Rockies lost the first game. But NFL, I understand, is going to start this fall also. And back in the days when the NFL was something lots of fun, and nobody worried too much about what people did during the national anthem at the beginning, remember old John Madden? He was an announcer, and he was also coach for a while. He used to have all kinds of funny things he talked about, and one of the things he talked about was Super Bowl stew, and he came up with that idea probably around Super Bowl, but he says, and he would talk about it as he was announcing the games or making his comments, that you take a bowl full of lean cubed beef, and he says you brown it real good, and he says, and then you put in sliced peppers and tomatoes and onions and slice up celery and carrots and potatoes and tomatoes and or turnips and rutabagas. You put it in a broth, and you said put a lot of spices in, especially garlic. He loved garlic. Cook the whole thing slowly for hours, and he says, and you're going to have a feast when you're done. But he says the secret is to cook it for hours. Because he says if you ate one of those ingredients one at a time, it wouldn't be a stew, it'd be a disaster, a gastronomic disaster. Can't imagine eating garlic, a teaspoonful of garlic, or a raw rutabaga. I've raised those things, and I wonder what they're good for, if not for feeding to the cattle. But if you didn't let it cook long enough, all it would be a disaster, not a stew. It needs to be cooked together. You can't judge a stew by eating its ingredients one at a time. You and I too often see life as only one piece at a time. So when tragedy strikes, we can't see a good purpose in it, or we assume that whatever that is, that's never going to be any good. How could it possibly be good? And yet, the opposite is most often true, and Romans 8:28 gives us a little help. We know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him. Today we see all kinds of stuff that isn't good. We see disease, and we see riots, and we see lies and stupidity and greed and hatred that just seems to be evil. Society seems to be all messed up. The stew is burned. And yet God in His wisdom can make something better and something good if we only look for it and trust that that's a part of His plan. That's what the first two things that Dr. Grounds talked about, begin and end with God, see things from a long-term perspective. And then the third thing he says, you have to define the word good. All things work together for good. He says good, well, for most of us, good means good health or good relationships or good life or good work or good home life or something like that. Good tends to become our circumstances, good or not. But that may not be always the biblical viewpoint. Good can be something that's way out there and that we may not be able to understand at the right time. Our good and God's good are not always the same things. I was married when I was 23 years old, and I was a widower when I was 38. After that automobile accident that took the life of my first wife, I made a series of foolish decisions and did some things that nearly ruined me and my career and almost ruined my boys. But things slowly started to get better. It's kind of like if you look at the circle, eventually some point in the circle has to be the bottom. But then you start to see it come back again. Well, anyway, things did start to get better, and I don't want to get into details, but one of the greatest things that happened in the middle of that thing is I went to a Bible class one Sunday up at Shepherd of the Hills, and a big class, all filled. There was only one chair empty in the class. There's probably 100 people there. One chair empty. And I sat down next to my wife, Carol. Now, she had been looking at me, but I was afraid of her. I'd been looking everywhere else. But I thought, all right, that chair's the only one, I'll sit down next to her. And by the end of that Bible class, because we were at the very back, we started chattering a little bit, and by the end of that Bible class, I decided to invite her over for lunch, and that was 34 and a half years ago. We've been married now these years. But the reason I say this is, in that time when we were married, she adopted my sons, and she also helped me to conduct a number of loss recovery workshops that helped 100 or more hurting people who were single again. I was one of those that needed a little bit of help in that whole process too, which sometimes the teacher teaches himself more than the students. And as I look back, some of the people that came to those workshops, together with hundreds more who attended the singles retreats that Carol, my wife, organized for about 16, 18 years after we got married, there's a whole lot of lives that were changed for the better. It even resulted in some of those couples that met getting married. One of those, by the way, belongs to this church, but I'm not going to reveal who that is. But had it not started with a tragic car accident the day before my 39th birthday, we could not have seen, especially at that time. That was a day that was all bad. The only good thing was that my sons weren't in the car with us. See, you and I can't see everything up front. No way we can. It always takes time to see something good. True story of a man with a group of his friends that were hunting in northern Great Britain. And as they were going along through the heath, he stuck his foot in a hole and twisted it pretty badly, and he couldn't walk well enough, and so he said to his friends, he says, the road's not far away, I'll sit on the road and wait for someone to come and pick me up. You guys go ahead. And one of the hunters said, good luck. I don't know who's out driving on such a terrible day as this is, cold day. The man took his gun, he went over and sat next to the road, and soon a car stopped, and a woman rolled down the window and asked if he was okay, and he explained that he'd injured his ankle, and she said, get in, I'll take you to get help. And the moment he got in the car, he realized the driver was Queen Elizabeth. This happened in the 1970s. Her Majesty served, you see, during World War II as an auto mechanic. And Balmoral Castle wasn't that far away. They were visiting, and she used to get in the car every now and then and go for a ride by herself. And she picked up that man and she drove him into town, got her doctor to look at him. And I find it to be interesting, that man was carrying his gun the whole time with the Queen. And nobody said anything, nor did she for that matter. He was taken to the doctor by the Queen and he was helped out. Now, this is a true story. And I doubt that any of us are ever going to have our troubles bailed out by a queen. But surely we must realize that we do get help every day by a king. The Creator God of the universe, our loving God, who comes to us in His world through people and helps us with His unlimited resources. People who can help us, people who can direct us, encourage us and pray for us. If things work out for our good, then it will certainly be God's good as well as our good. Good may not mean our immediate happiness or even in the long run or a long life. God's good means He helps us through life so that all that happens helps us trust Him more. Trusting in His mercy and love, it's true that we can know God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him. Does that include things that might hurt us? Well, yes. Or times when we're heartbroken? Yes. Or the times when we sin badly? Yeah, those times too. It even comes when the worst that could possibly happen does happen. Some people today think that this COVID virus is about the worst thing that could happen to our world. They're shouting it from the housetops that it's going to take years and it could be the end of civilization as we know it, and so forth and so forth. But we have to be careful not to get so wrapped up in what's happening right now that we forget that there's a long future out there with bigger and even perhaps better things that could happen each day. Every year I speak, whether it's here or another church, and in retirement I don't do it as much at all as I once did. And by the way, it was hard to get up this morning. It really was. I couldn't believe how hard I didn't sleep very good last night either, and I was grumbling, and my wife was kind of listening as I was grumbling about some things. And I said, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore. But I have to say, once I got back in here, put my gowns on, it was almost like riding a bicycle. You don't forget. Although I almost forgot my gowns at home. But every year, a privilege to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to do so in a free country is something I just take for granted. But I wonder sometimes how long our country is going to stay free. A very important man once said, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it'll be because we destroyed them ourselves. He said, nations will not die from invasion, they'll die from internal rottenness. And he also said, shall some transatlantic military take a giant step around the earth and crush us with a blow? No, he said, never. All the armies of Europe and Asia could not by force take a drink of the Ohio River or put a footprint on the Blue Ridge Mountains in 1,000 years. If a destruction will be our lot, we ourselves will be its author. Abraham Lincoln spoke those words 20 years before he was president and presided over a country at civil war. It was 180 years ago, 1840s. Today, I believe our nation stands on a cliff. And if we don't collectively take a step back here pretty soon, we're going to see some damage that's going to be unimaginable. We're creating a future governed by fear and confusion for those who follow us. We can only imagine what our future will be if we don't stop and realize what's important and ask God to help us make the right decisions so that we are able to know that we're at least heading in somewhat the right direction. Who could have guessed 6 months ago that we would be still wearing masks in church, or that some areas they don't allow singing? You can't sing. It's going to be something wrong with what's in the air, I guess, during worship. Don't share a handshake. Well, that's fine. But who'd have guessed all this 6 months ago? We've become a nation governed not so much by law and common good as by fear and hatred. President Lincoln also said, my concern is not whether God is on my side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, because his side is right, always. God's values and human values aren't always the same. You and I cannot know what the future holds, but we do know, as the saying goes, who holds the future. Let us therefore cling to Jesus Christ in faith and follow what he shows us and how he guides us. And let's look for the good that God will show us when this current pestilence is over with. Because yes, God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him, even with all the stuff that's going on, or a cliff that some call COVID-19. Romans 8:28 is God loving us, lovingly telling us that no matter what happens, no matter how crazy, no matter how upside down or unfair life may seem, he will always be there with us. I'll never leave you nor forsake you, he says in 1 Peter. He promises that, and God always keeps his promises. He will one day show us what good we're going to come from all of this. We can't possibly see it now, but future generations perhaps will see it, God willing. We don't need to understand God in order to trust him. We just need to follow him because of what he's done for us in his Son, Jesus Christ. It's good to thank him for our Lord Jesus Christ and all the blessings he gives to us on the way. Because no matter what the future holds, we can strive to hear the King of the universe as he comes by, stops and opens the door, and he says, "Come on in, come with me, and I'll help you get through all this." God grant this for Jesus' sake. Amen.